Hey team, we all know that those of us who have chosen a life in professional sales, we chose a business discipline that's a little more tumultuous than many others. And according to Gardner and others, as we all know, the tenure of somebody who's a sales leader today, less than 2 years, the average tenure, and the average tenure of a professional salesperson, also less than 2 years. So it's a unique profession that we've dedicated our lives to. And I'll tell you, today's podcast is going to be so helpful to all of us because today we're talking with Sam Jacobs. And Sam is the founder and CEO of Pavilion, a thriving community with more than 10,000 members around the world. But Sam has led revenue teams at a number of different firms, including Behavevox, The Muse, Livestream, Axial, and Gearson Lehman Group. He also started a very successful podcast called the Sales Hacker Podcast. But he's written this book, Kind Folks Finish First. And I'd like to share just a wonderful testimonial from somebody that we really respect, Daniel Pink. Daniel's been on our show at least once. And his book, To Sell as Humans, one of our favorite sales books of all time. But here's what he writes about Sam's book, Kind Folks Finish First. This is an excellently crafted book with a badly needed message. You don't have to be an aggressive jerk to succeed in business. In fact, if you lead with generosity and fairness, your professional life will be better off and your whole world will be just plain better. We have a great conversation with Sam Jacobs today, team. And by the way, I'm aided in the co-hosting duties today by our old friend Dave Hanley, who leads sales for AdvertiseCast. And Dave's led a number of startups to very successful exit. But all of the challenges and the ups and downs of being in a sales career, of course, Dave's lived that as well. So he helps me chat with Sam today. We're going to be talking about some of the key elements of Kind Folks Finish First, why Sam founded Pavilion, the value people get from the community of sales professionals, how you need to lead with a value-first approach. What are your values as a business professional? He's got some interesting thoughts about people in sales today because of that short tenure. We all need back doors. So side hacks being critically important so we're not entirely dependent on our employers when these changes take place. Really enjoyed meeting Sam. Wonderful fellow. Great book, by the way. I wish I read this book or had this book when I started my sales career, so you should pick it up. But a great conversation today. I enjoyed chatting with Sam. I think you're going to enjoy this podcast as well. And when you do, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast because that really matters to us. And thank you for doing so. Here's Sam Jacobs. So team, welcome to a LinkedIn Live version of the Selling Well podcast. It's been a little while since we've done a LinkedIn Live. We're so happy to do it today because we've got a couple of fantastic guests for today that I'm going to introduce in a second. In today's book, we're going to be talking about Kind Folks Finish First, just a spectacular book by Sam Jacobs, who's the founder of Pavilion, and so important for professional sales today. So this podcast exists to try and improve the lives of salespeople with education. So when we get mastery of what we do, we feel better. And as always, we're trying to share some strategies and processes and tools that help all of us get better. And today we're going to have a great conversation because Pavilion exists to do the same thing, to really help salespeople achieve their potential. So as we go through today, team, first of all, thank you for those of you joining us live. We're going to have an opportunity for you to ask questions. So I'm going to encourage you as we're going through this discussion, go into the chat feature or the question feature, just click down at the bottom and ask your questions in real time. And when we get a break in the action, either Dave or I will go to them. And for those who don't know, my name is Mark Cox. I run a company called In the Funnel. We are a group of sales coaches and consultants that help companies sell better. But I'm really delighted to introduce a couple of my guests here today. So I'm going to first start with Dave Hanley. And many of you know Dave is a friend of In the Funnel, longtime client of In the Funnel, for full disclosure. And today, Dave's the Chief Revenue Officer of AdvertiseCast. the podcast advertising division of Libsyn. Before entering the podcast industry, Dave co-founded several successful enterprise SaaS businesses in the insurance and risk management space. But he was the co-founder of AdvertiseCast back in 2017, based on his passion for consuming great podcasts. And by the way, he had great timing. The company quickly became a leader in the space as the first and largest online podcast advertising marketplace. In 2021, AdvertiseCast got acquired by Libsyn. So now Dave works in with Libsyn. Dave, welcome today.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I'm happy to be here. Great to meet Sam and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks for joining. I'd now like to introduce Sam Jacobs. So team, Sam Jacobs is the founder and the CEO of Pavilion. Many of you already know about Pavilion. He launched Pavilion originally as Revenue Collective in 2016. And then he bootstrapped the company to 10 million ARR, annual recurring revenue. Before working with Elephant Ventures, he took 25 million in funding and growth financing. Before Pavilion, Sam spent 15 years as a senior revenue leader in VC-backed companies in New York area, including Gerson Lehrman Group, Axial, interesting story there, Livestream Vimeo, The Muse, and BehaviorOx. So Sam's story in this journey has been well articulated in the book we're going to discuss here today, Kind Folks Finish First. Sam lives in the West Village of Manhattan with his wife and two dogs, William and Oswald. And by the way, we're all pet lovers here. Oftentimes when we've got Dave Hanley on the podcast, we can see out his window and his horses in the background.
Wow.
So not today from Munich, Germany, but Sam,
Yeah.
welcome to the podcast today.
Well, thanks for having me, Mark and Dave. I'm a happy customer of Libsyn, by the way, for
nice.
what I do. So just
Good
giving you a
stuff.
shout out there.
Right.
But delighted to be here.
Thanks, Sam. So we'll jump right into a team. And again, as people keep joining, please give us your questions online. But off camera, Sam, we're chatting a little bit about the book because I really did enjoy this book. And I probably read a sales book every couple of weeks these days for the podcast. It's part of the joy of doing it. This one really touched me. This one really resonated with me on a number of different fronts. But let me throw it over to you and get a little bit of the shorter story of your journey, and then what led you to write this book.
Sure. Well, again, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Our pleasure.
My journey, I've been in New York for 20 years, the second time. And so I came back to New York to begin working in startups in 2003. And from 2003 to 2018, 15 years, I was working as a salesperson effectively and as a revenue leader at high growth companies. And what happened to me was that as I achieved what I thought would be greater degrees of success in my professional life, I began to realize diminishing levels of happiness and enjoyment and job security. And so I worked at this one place that was super successful, GLG, for 7.5 years. And then I worked at this place, the places that you mentioned in the bio, Mark, Axial for 4.5 years. And then I worked at Livestream for 18 months. And then I worked at The Muse for 9 months, and then BehaviorOx for 10 months. And so what was happening was that my tenures were shrinking as in sort of the opposite way that I expected, because when I was growing up, I thought, as you become more senior, you'll become more secure, more established, you'll achieve wealth, you'll do all that stuff. And it wasn't really happening for me. And then the book is about really the founding of Pavilion, but also the codification of, and it's also, it was about me coming to this epiphany that like I could remove myself from the way that I had thought I had been taught. Maybe it was all in my mind, but the way that I had been taught to live my career, and try to doesn't mean I'm perfect, and I don't think I'm better than anybody. It just means try to embody a different set of principles and see what would happen. And so the book starts Friday the 13th, October 2017, when I was fired from the Muse. And that's another part of the journey, which is that, I faced a lot of failure and a lot of terminations, and certainly relevant in an economy like the one we're in for technology. And I was driving down the New Jersey Turnpike with a dog that's now passed away, Walter, in the back seat, and with my partner in the front seat. And I got a message from the CEO, and she, I was using my phone. This was before Apple CarPlay became so ubiquitous in like cars. And so I was using my phone as a GPS and using Waze, and I got a little notification. And so I pulled over, and it said, hey, I didn't even realize you'd be out of the office today. Can you come back into the office first thing on Monday? And I remembered thinking, she's not very a morning person. She's not really into like first thing in the morning. And I'd gotten that kind of 3-line email before, and I knew immediately what was happening, which was that I was being fired. And that was a moment at which I decided to embark on a different kind of journey. And that journey led me to really beginning to build Pavilion in earnest. It was really a journey of, I hate to sound too cliche or too woo-woo, as my coach would say, but a journey of self-actualization. And it was a journey that led to where I am today. And so that's effectively like what the book was about. And I guess fundamentally, just to like cut to the chase, the book is about a different set of values that I articulate and that I would share with the audience and with people that would read it, that says, you don't have to behave in a way that you've been taught, or maybe some people have been taught. It doesn't have to be dog eat dog. It doesn't have to be ruthless competition. It doesn't have to be zero sum. And you don't have to treat relationships transactionally. You don't have to, every time you help somebody, you don't have to get an invoice back in return. You can do things for the good of helping. And it's not that it'll just make you feel better, but that you'll die a pauper, penniless and destitute. It is that this is a formula for professional success, that I've used this formula to build the company that I now run and to help other people do the same.
So first of all, just so much to unpack there,
Right.
but just to pause. And so for everybody out there, just like try and imagine, because this is what really hit me so much, Sam. You're in your car, you're driving, you think everything's okay, but you've seen it so many times. And the chapter 1's title is, fired at the rest stop. So you've got that weekend where you're going to go through this, and you're walking into this meeting on Monday and you're going to get fired. And this has happened multiple times. And as you say, we may have been of a generation where we thought, hey, the longer we do this, the more stable our role is going to be, and so on and so on and so forth. But as you aptly point out in chapter 2, Gardner tells us the chief revenue officer is going to last 18 months. Dave Hanley, be careful, son. So keep your head up. So hopefully this puts wind in your sail. But first of all, now you're going to go through this whole rigmarole again. And to have that, for everybody who's going to go through some tumultuous times, there is that adage that said, it's sunniest after it's darkest. Maybe we have to go through some of these things. And any of us who've had a little, modicum of success, you've had some of those challenging times as well. So it really sort of tugged at me. I just related to that so much. And whether I was, I had a similar type journey in some ways, Sam, where maybe I tapped out of companies before I was going to get fired. So I was pretty happy at one point in time to tell people, if I didn't like something, I just walked out of it. But maybe in some sense, I was thinking, I'm not going to be successful here, so I'm going to tap out before they tap out. And so going through this journey, at some point in time, you get quite frustrated and go, there's got to be a better way. And then leading to this abundance mindset. So starting to say, well, listen, okay, it's not about me. It's not about what I'm making. Let's just figure out how we put a little kindness into the world here. And the fact that abundance begets abundance. And before this journey, by the way, you had this I thought there was some great wisdom in here about doing something you love. And we have a little shared interest. I sent Dave a picture. I'm back in my bar band again after years and years and years. And we played a historic club in Toronto on Friday night called Lee's Palace. And we went on at 10 p.m. and finished at about 12:15.
Wow.
And in the middle of that show, I realized my bedtime is 10 p.m. and there's a reason for that. and so I'm a drummer, so I could feel my coordination leaving me, pretty quickly as I was going through this gig. But what did you do before you went into the world, and what did it teach you about finding that idea about doing something you love?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's as you alluded, Mark, I've got a background in music as well. I ran a record label just out of school in the late 90s, set up a we set up on a horse farm in the middle of Virginia, and we thought we were going to like start a commune, and a bunch of people would come through the commune, and we record, and I reference a bunch of like artist collectives that people might know about from my indie rock days. What I realized in starting that record label was that, first of all, the music industry is like a pretty bad business. But also that, when people say do what you love, I think it's not always the most useful advice.
Right.
And there's a couple of reasons for that. And so the first reason is that I just believe in the power of experience. That I'm not trying to stifle anybody's fulfillment or actualization. And if you're whatever age you are, if you want to go out and start your own business or do your own thing, I support you, as I did. But I will tell you that the first thing is that I didn't really know what I loved when I was just entering the workforce. And it takes it takes some reps, as they would say,
Right.
it takes some experience. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is I find that people miscategorize what they quote unquote love. And sometimes they identify the mission of the organization with the jobs to be done in that organization. And they conflate those two things. And they say, you know what, I really love Lululemon. So I want to work for Lululemon as a senior controller. Okay, well, being a senior controller in Lululemon doesn't mean you're doing yoga all day and, you're, hobnobbing with other celebrities that also love Lululemon. It means that you're looking at financial statements.
Right.
And then the final thing I would say, and this is perhaps the most important thing, is that if we're thinking about professional success, there's a Venn diagram. And there's three things that are involved in that Venn diagram. There's what people are good at, there's what they're interested in or what they love. And then most importantly, there's where the market is moving.
Yeah.
And people underestimate or they undervalue where the market is moving and what they're good at. And they overvalue what they're interested in.
Right.
And I was really interested in recording music. I love recording music. I've got a bunch of albums on Spotify. That doesn't mean that I should be a professional musician. That might just mean that that's a fun hobby for me.
Right.
And I needed to look at the fact that I was starting a record label at the rise of mp3.com, the rise, yes, maybe recorded music is coming back a little bit, but fundamentally there's about 2 decades there where the entire economics of the music industry fell apart.
Right.
And it was not a good time to start a record label. And that doesn't make me less creative or less artistic. That's just the reality of the world. And and then the last thing I'll say in my long-winded way is that people, they don't distill the daily activities of a function. They put a label on the broad definition of the function. They say, I don't like finance or I don't like sales, right? Let's talk about salespeople.
Yeah.
I don't like sales. I would never do sales. Well, what is sales? Let's define that. I think sales is talking to people and being curious about them and figuring out what their problems are. And then figuring out if your product, solution, service might be able to help that person solve that problem. That's one part of what sales is. Another part is, do you like long project-based work? Okay, then yeah, you shouldn't work as an SMB seller with 30-day sales cycles. Do you like instant gratification? Do you like to know that I do something and very soon thereafter I see the result from it? Then sales might be a really good career option for you. So I find that's a long-winded way of saying, like, just simply saying to an early career person, do what you love, not super helpful. And I find that giving people a framework for how to think about it, it does a couple of things. And one of them is it manages their expectations a little bit, because the other thing that happens that is sort of happening now with quiet quitting and employee disengagement is that everybody's been misled about the nature of work to a certain extent. And everybody's like, why do I not feel like I'm at church and, the pastor is singing and I feel like connected to Jesus? It's like, because sometimes it's just work. Sometimes that's what it is. And it's not that every moment is going to be an epiphany. And again, when all you say is do what you love, it's not super helpful when you're thinking about how do I practically build a career over decades as opposed to over months.
Well, so, your friend, Dan Pink, who's been on our show once or twice.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, but one of the things he said at the end, one of my favorite books of all time in addition to yours, is actually to sell as human.
Yeah, it's a great
And
book.
it kind of came around at the same time that we started this business about 10 years ago. And as you know, Dan Pink didn't come from a background in sales. But on the podcast, I asked him, I said, why'd you write this book about sales if you had no background in sales? And he said there was such a disconnect with everybody that he knew in professional sales, but the stereotype of someone in sales as a pitcher and a used car salesman and all this. And he said everybody he knew in professional sales were some of the smartest, most intellectually curious, problem-solving people he knew out there. And in that book, I love it. It's like a master class or an MBA for sales because his research is so thorough. But he was trying to find out of the 8 in 9 people in the US who aren't in professional sales, 1 in 9 are, 8 in 9 aren't. What percentage of their day do they spend trying to persuade somebody else to their point of view? And it turns out it's 39% of the day. So all half of every day almost, they're trying to convince somebody else to their point of view. So everybody's got this default, I'm not in sales. We hear that so often when we're training, service technicians or something of that nature. I'm not in sales. I could never sell anybody anything. And selling's exactly what you said. It's helping somebody achieve a better future or a better business outcome. And at the end, I asked Dan, I said, hey, where do you see sales going? And he netted it out as saying, today, professional B2B sales is management consulting. Anything that isn't that will be taken care of by automation or AI, et cetera, but really core sales, true sales is management consulting.
I love that. I couldn't agree with that more.
Any of this resonate for you, Mr. Hanley?
Yeah, I think just thinking through, my background and how it relates. Like, as you know, Mark, I went to school and I thought I was going to get into finance, and I decided after my second year accounting course that I really hated it, and I kind of stumbled into, kind of more entrepreneurship. And what you realize when you want to start a business and work on a kind of a new venture, that a large percentage of what you're doing is exactly that. It's sales, right? And I think, like you said, Sam, it's like, I think the key is, being curious, especially what kind of happened in my career is if you don't know what you're doing, which I didn't, I got into an industry that I knew nothing about. I was by nature just asking a lot of questions because I wanted to learn and I wanted to be curious. And that actually came across as, wow, this is a really great person to talk to, and they're really interested in our business and they really care about how they can help us. But for the most part, I was just trying to learn. But that's really what a lot of salespeople that are new, to selling don't really realize is that, like Mark said, you don't show up and pitch. You got to ask the questions, you got to solve a problem, and you got to communicate, whether or not you can help add value and solve that problem.
We just came there's a big conference up here this week in Toronto called Collision and Technology Startup Conference, and 36,000 people downtown Toronto yesterday and the day before. And the energy and enthusiasm of walking around a conference like that is just spectacular. And, you're meeting, and there's a lot of startups, and they've set it up so startups and mid-tier and growth organizations, lots of VC, but everybody gets a seat at the table. It's kind of an interesting setup. And yesterday, I probably chatted with 20 startups, going through and, just having conversations, and not a single person in any of those things asked me a question. So the best 2 questions I got, no joke, in the whole conference, and I was there for 8 hours yesterday, was somebody said, hey, what brought you to the conference? Great question. And then he said, tell me about your business. I'm not joking. This was the guy taking my order in the coffee truck outside of the conference. Okay, I'm going to shout out.
He may have a future in sales. Exactly.
I'm not joking. This is the only person in the conference who asked me anything.
That's sad. That makes me upset.
Well, it gave us an opportunity as we were walking around. After I'd have these conversations with these startup founders, I'd actually just share that and just say, hey, here's a couple of things to do next time if you're open to it. You might want to think about this question and get someone talking to you. Plus, you'll enjoy it more, because I could see when they were doing their pitch for the 20th time that day, they were so tired. And I just thought, ask a question, get involved in an engaged conversation. But I'm going to give a shout out to the guy taking orders from Fleet Coffee when I was getting my cappuccino
Did
yesterday.
great work, those good people at Fleet Coffee.
Those good people, wherever they are. So Sam, tell us about, okay, at the rest stop, now we've had this epiphany. And it leads to, to 2016, 2017. You'd always had sort of a dinner club or a networking club for other people in your role. How does that evolve into what is, the opportunity with Pavilion today, first Revenue Collective and then Pavilion? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Well, the first thing I would say is it began without any sense of expectation. So, I starting a dinner club, and there was one in Toronto that I forget, David somebody was sort of putting together, and there was like TO sales or something like that, or sales TO. There was one in their Chicago sales assembly. So my point is, like, I didn't think that this was a venture scale business, right? I didn't think this was not some world dominating, master plan.
Right.
This was me saying, I'm not solving backwards from I need to have dominated the world by XYZ year. It is me saying, I'm going to check out of the merry-go-round, the carousel that I'm on, and I'm going to build something that I care about and that I love. And I'm not going to worry too much about anything other than, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, is there going to be a roof over my head? Can I pay rent? And can I do what I love, which is helping people and connecting people so that they can achieve their career outcome? So,
yes.
I got fired. It was the fall of 2017. I said, the other realization was, you know what? And I've written about this on LinkedIn, which is I can't be dependent for all of my income on one source of revenue anymore if I'm going to work for somebody else. I need quote unquote side hustles. Like the world is too uncertain for me to put all of my eggs in a basket that somebody else totally controls and that can decide at any moment that I'm no longer suitable for the basket.
Right.
So I said, okay, I'm going to build a consulting business and I'm going to take this dinner club and I'm going to try and monetize it. And I'm not trying to monetize it so that I can be on the cover of Time magazine. I'm not trying to be Elon Musk. I'm just trying to do something that I care about, that I'm passionate about, that frankly can't be taken from me. And that was really the origin of it. So from there, it was it was like 80 or 90 people it was 20 people then, and or 22. And I said, hey, everybody, we're going to charge dues on January 1st, 2018. Who's in? And 20 out of 22 people said, I'm in. Not sure what I'm paying for, but I'm up for it. And then we grew from there. And then people started hearing about what we were doing all over the world, and people from other cities started reaching out. Now, why did they? I think one thing I think is, like, sometimes people don't know why they're successful. But if I had to guess, I would say that there was a point of view behind the community. It wasn't networking for its own sake. It was, okay, well, what do we believe about the world, and how should we align, and what do we still believe about the world to this day? And so we believe a couple of things. First of all, we believe that, there had been a little bit undue influence focused on CEOs and investors, and not enough care taken for the people that run the companies and that operate those companies. Second point of view, and so as a consequence of that, we taught people how to negotiate. We still do, right? We teach people how to negotiate. We teach people what they're entitled to when it comes to executive compensation. What I want for everybody is that you don't have to be this founder or CEO to lead a meaningful and fulfilling life. That there's a role for an executive operator at a company, but that role needs to be renegotiated because the old deal wasn't really working very well. And so that was a big part, I think, of what attracted people to the community, which is that there was a latent point of view that was articulated. And frankly, when I think we do worse in the modern, in our current incarnation, which is 10,000 people, I think it's because we're not doing enough to articulate that point of view, that we're not clear enough in why we exist and what we stand for. But that was one of the big reasons why people began to come to us. And we grew over the course of 2018. I worked one more place full time, and then I got fired again. And so at that point, it was like I was having breakfast with a mentor, and I said, I'm going to try and work on Pavilion full time, but if it doesn't work, I guess I will. I'll just go back to being a CRO. And he smiled and said, "I think we've tried that experiment at this point." So. And so, I won't say the rest was history. The rest, it's been a lot of stops and starts, a lot of mistakes, and a lot of great outcomes. And I think we're right now, as I speak to you, we're in the middle of our next phase of evolution, which, funnily enough, is really just about getting back to our roots and about re-embracing the ideas that got us here in the first place, which is a point of view that we exist for the individual operator first and foremost, and that we want to train that person not just to be a good employee, but to be an actualized and self-realized human. And that might mean consulting business and advisory business, just like you've done, Mark. We want to teach people, how do you have a career? And a career is not just you work one place for 20 years anymore. It's a series of gigs and advisory roles and consulting jobs. And it is the combination of all of those things and the accumulation of all of those experiences over time, which hopefully lead to wealth, impact, better relationships with your partners, that whole thing.
Well, the path there, though, is always, are you enjoying what you're doing? You talk a lot about you weren't fulfilled in many of the roles leading up to it. And you have this epiphany. Frankly, Sam, even within the funnel and the podcast, I've always felt the same way, that finally, when I did this, it felt like this is what I was meant to do, but I needed that corporate journey for 20 years to teach me something that was of value. I needed that experience. I needed to do massive deals and smaller deals. I needed to run big teams and small teams. I needed to learn something that was then of value if I could add my own sort of unique ability in there. And so one of the things, that I really like, we were just talking there a little bit about, you think the side hustle and consulting, and chapter 7, every crisis is an opportunity. You do talk about this, what is very helpful for folks listening to this podcast, the rules of compensation. I think there's some great coaching in this book as to, if you're negotiating that next deal, what should you think about? And there's 5, I think you say there's 5 things that you're entitled to when it comes to compensation. Number 1, due diligence. So do your investigation. Number 2, aligned compensation. Liquidity, by the way. So if I'm getting options, am I ever going to get them out? So, and we'll talk about double triggers a little later on. Severance. Negotiate the severance up front and think about that, which is one of the ways you got a little breathing space to get into this. And then consulting, talking about how do you build something on the side for you that no matter what, you're allowed to continue on doing. And we work with, in the funnel, we work with a lot of people who do exactly that. They may have been a client of ours at some point in time, like Dave. And then over time, they kind of start to work with us because they've got their own consulting businesses on the side. It's a great model for them. It's a fantastic model for us. And here's the other thing I love just reading that chapter about negotiation. Understand what you'd like and then what you're willing to agree to. That most people don't understand how to negotiate. And you underline this a few times. Don't bluff. I don't know where we were taught to negotiate, but being tough and mean and banging at the table. At one point in time, we negotiated $1 billion deal. I've never been so scared in my life. But the one thing I knew I wasn't going to do was lie at the table. Like, I was never been so over my head ever. But when we were negotiating it, the only thing I had was my character and integrity. Don't make a commitment you can't adhere to, but don't bluff. This is not a TV show. So that's a very good coaching for everybody out there. Comments, Mr. Hanley?
Yeah, I think, Mark and I were talking about this piece of the book before, Sam, and it kind of took me back. And I think Mark, he was, like I said, I've worked with Mark for many years. I don't even remember how many years it's been, but
Yeah.
one of the original kind of big learnings I had from Mark was, right on negotiation. You're trying to work a big deal, and it's like, hey, we said, price is X and the client's looking for Y. And, trying to find that win-win and what's important, and, asking the question, saying, hey, you know what, we're trying to do, we gave you a price of 100,000, you want it for 80. But what else is important to you? Is it the timing? Can you wait? Do you want it now? What other kind of levers can we pull to kind of get something that works for both of us? Hey, can you pay a little bit up front as opposed to, on the back end? So just little, asking those questions to figure out, how can we negotiate and come to an agreement? And like Mark said, we're not, lying, bluffing, throwing red herrings. It's more just asking the right questions and trying to find something that works for both parties.
Make the pie bigger. Make the pie bigger. It's not about a bigger piece of the pie. It's trying to think about how do we actually make the pie bigger, but there's got to really be that trust and authenticity, I think, to have that kind of conversation. Sam, one of the things that's kind of hitting me, which I don't know if the book answers directly, but you have a conversation where you seem like, the wisest, most balanced person out there. What was happening that you were getting dismissed frequently? Or why, in your view, are CROs only lasting 18 months in their job today? Because Pavilion must see a ton of this with the on the bench and so on and so forth. What's going on that the tenure of this role is so short?
And I'm very interested in this answer.
That's right.
Being in the seat right
Dave's
now.
got his pen out.
Yeah, hold on. Let me get a pen.
Yeah.
I think, listen, so first of all, let's speak about me first. I don't think I'm blameless at all. So I think I can be a difficult person to work with. And I think that I was taking, it doesn't, when you're a C-level executive working for a CEO, what you have to understand fundamentally is that it's their company. It's not, they can call it a partnership. You can call it the first team. You can read Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Pat Lencioni. It is their company. It is their company. And you work in service to them, right? And I always joke about the relationship of somebody where, if you're in a romantic relationship with somebody else and they yell at you, but they don't get over their grievances with you, and they don't leave. They seem to want to just stay and yell. And that was me a lot, right? That was being disgruntled and saying I could do it better. Well, then if I could do it better, I should go do it better, right? Because it's their company. And this idea of like, well, if I was just being frustrated with the potential of an opportunity without acknowledging the reality of it, that's my fault. That's not anybody else's problem. Those idiots, they won't listen to me. That's my problem, not their problem. So, and that's how I was, right? I've always felt like I was probably a better startup CEO than I was a startup employee, but I never had anything that I was working on of any size or scale. Now, thank God I do. And lo and behold, I haven't been fired.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Since 2016 when I got this thing off the ground. So that's a great thing. Now let's speak more broadly to the tenure of a CRO. I think there's a lot of factors at play, and I generally don't think that there's an enemy. There's no bad person or good person in this equation. I just think so. First thing is, we're working in a world that is changing more rapidly by the day. That's just true. We're talking about AI, right? It's not that AI was invented with ChatGPT, but certainly this current hype cycle was created in November. We are 7 months into this thing, right? And it already feels like we've been talking about it forever. The world is changing more quickly than it used to change. I don't know if we ever, many of us have watched Mad Men, and we'd watch a thing where Don Draper goes to lunch, has 3 martinis, and then goes to take a nap. And that's fine, actually, because nothing really happens that quickly back then. They didn't have computers, they had telephones, they didn't have pagers, they didn't have iPhones. So the pace of business was slower. So that's one thing I think. The second thing I think is, if we're going to work at high growth companies in particular, we do have to acknowledge that a $2 million business that grows to $6 million or $8 million, let's say over 2 years, and this is true for us, we went to 4 to 17 over 2 years. Okay. The things that I need an executive to do at a $4 million company are just different things. It's a different company. It's a different company. And the only reason it's become so clear to all of us is because we are choosing to work in these high growth, inorganic environments. But in the old days, that was seen as extraordinary growth. It wasn't true. Things don't grow at 200% indefinitely. It was technology that enabled this. The last thing I'll say is, and this is part of, the work, frankly, of Pavilion, which is like, again, community unto itself is not that interesting. Community with a point of view is more interesting because there's something to rally around. So there's a point of view, I believe, that founders and CEOs and investors don't really know how to make money. In fact, most CROs don't really know how to make money. What do I mean by that? That there's a perception that, and this is related to what you said about the Bill of Rights, about those 5 things. And the second thing that you mentioned is aligned compensation, right? There's this world that we've lived in for a long time, which is that the senior sales leader, the chief revenue officer, the VP of sales, should be the highest paid person at the company. And that's because the salesperson brings in all the money. Mm-hmm. But that's not true. That's not where money comes from. Money comes from product, marketing, sales, customer success, partnerships, all being in alignment, right? Mm-hmm. You want to add more money, you need happy customers. You get happy customers from a good product. You get people aware of your product because you have great marketing. So this whole idea that we're going to hire the savior salesperson that used to work at Salesforce or Adobe or Oracle, and they're going to come in, they're going to transform our business, and we're going to pay that person $700,000 a year, but we're going to pay them $350 base, $350 commission. And when that doesn't happen, because it's not really the senior sales leader, we're going to fire that person. We tried to hire the savior didn't work, back to the drawing board, let's find the next savior. When in fact, the process of building long-term sustainable businesses is alignment across the go-to-market organization, which is another perspective that Pavilion shares. So that's part of the education that I'm on. Like, I came from just prior to this session, Mark, I was teaching the first session of Pavilion's CRO school. And we were teaching developing a theory of enterprise value. And what is that about? That is about, let's set a foundation for how money actually gets made. Because it's not hiring the salesperson with lots and lots of meetings and no process can still make money for the business. The salesperson with the absolute best medic process and everything is qualified and put into Salesforce, but there's no meetings at all, that person will get fired. Mm-hmm. So let's align on how value is created. But to the point of the 18 months, I think that lots of people aren't aligned on how value is created. And I think investors and CEOs and founders, particularly those that come from technical backgrounds, from product backgrounds, they don't really know what's supposed to happen. They think I hire a salesperson and money comes out a month later. And they don't understand, no, not really.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that's a great explanation. We've asked that question 50 times on this show. And that's really, it really is a great explanation. Does that resonate for you, Dave?
Yeah, I think, what I was just thinking about kind of relates to, Mark, what you talk about a lot. And it's, you can't just, like you said, Sam, parachute in this amazing salesperson and they can just make it rain. There has to be alignment in terms of, like, going back to the core of what you like to talk about, Mark, is the value proposition of the business. What problems do you solve? All that needs to be throughout every aspect of the organization. Marketing needs to talk to that. Customer service needs to know that. And, that needs to kind of emanate from them as well. And I think a lot of times somebody, maybe like the person who's running the business, doesn't really even know how to articulate their value proposition, but they expect a salesperson to come in and just, go out there and make magic. Yes. And that's not going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, the last funny, I think it's funny. I don't know if anybody else will, but like, I preach this stuff to the CEOs and founders that I advise. And I say, you got to invest in marketing before sales. I don't mean you hire all marketing before you hire a single salesperson, but this function, right? That the function needs to be excellent. So they say, I got it, Sam. I've been doing some research on marketing and I hired a director at Demand Gen because I'm doing what you said and nothing's happening. I'm like, well, Demand Gen is FedEx. Demand Gen is logistics. Demand Gen is putting a message in front of a certain group of people at a certain time so that they'll take action. So what's the message? Like, what are you putting in the container? Like, what do you mean? What's the message? That our thing is great and that everybody should sign up for it. You're like, well, that's
features and functions. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
It's totally it. And then they come out of meetings where it falls down and they go, she didn't get it. Right? They're in front of a client. They can't articulate it. The client doesn't even understand what they're talking about. It's gibberish. And then he leaves, and then they just point at the client going, she didn't get it. She's not right for us. The hard work is actually boiling this, the old Albert Einstein. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough.
Yeah.
Why should somebody work with your company? What's unique and different about you? Application development shops, 100,000 different application development shops. How do these people differentiate? It's all the same. The hard work is in capturing this to enable the sales organization to be successful or enable the marketing team to be, but this is hard work. It's not self-evident work.
100%. And the last thing I'll say is, so you have that speech, you give that speech to them and they say, all right, fine. How long, so how long does that take to like create the right message? And you're like, yeah, it takes a long time. Like this. And they're like, well, I don't have a long time. I just sold these investors on the promise of, this year. I think I'm just going to go hire more salespeople.
And that's exactly what everybody's done with the VC money until there weren't any more.
Yeah, exactly.
Until you couldn't do it anymore, and that the prices kept going up, and the model just doesn't work. It's funny. By the way, I should point the finger at in the funnel here. We're in the same boat as everybody else. We came up with value proposition messaging 10 years ago, 8 years ago. And then it came from me, and we thought it worked. And then it would go through the organization, and then it became this mantra that everybody was repeating. And we were teaching it in our CRO school one day, and somebody put up their hand and said, "That's not your value proposition," because it used to be we help companies sell better. Companies come to us when revenue growth is stagnated or the sales team is underperforming. Our first 50 clients came to us because of that. And then we're in this workshop with 60 people, and 15 hands go up and go, "That's not why we're here. Our sales team is killing it. But we want to keep developing." He said, your value proposition is wrong. And they were absolutely right. We'd stopped seeing it through we're coaching people like Dave Hanley, killing it, exiting 2 and 3 times. He's not in trouble at all. He just wants to keep getting better.
Unfortunately, Mark, not everybody has clients that'll tell them that'll give them that feedback.
You're
They'll
exactly
just
right.
glaze over and leave the room. Right?
Yeah. But as you say, Sam, there's not a one-time thing, and you're refining it after 100 client meetings. And it's an ongoing process. It's not complicated. It's just not easy. None of this is an easy fix.
Exactly.
Well, what would you coach or counsel? So, our pal Frank Cespedes from Harvard, you probably know Frank. He's written 7 or 8 books. The latest one's called Sales Management That Works. And in that book, he talks about if you graduate college or university today, there's a 50% chance 1 in 2 of those people will have some role in professional sales in their lifetime. So that's what the stats seem to be. He's pulled up the stats on. What would you tell somebody graduating college or university today? Where would they go? Because when I did it, there were places to get the world's best sales education. I could go to Xerox, or I did go to Kodak. That's where I started. I was in a different country at literally sales university for 90 days, 4 months before I ever saw a client, or IBM. What does somebody do now in your view? Where do they go? Pavilion?
I think so. I mean, honestly, the truth of the matter is that Pavilion is more an executive community than an entry-level community. So I think you should come to Pavilion if you want to learn how to be an executive. And we have this concept of, associate and analyst memberships, but really those memberships are focused on education. I think It's a really hard question today. Like, if you'd asked me this a year ago, I'd still probably give the same answer that you gave, right? Go to work at Oracle, go to work at, ADP or Paychex or Xerox or a company that has the resources and infrastructure to really train you in the same way that before you should go work for a hedge fund, you'd probably work at Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs or Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, so that you can get trained in the
Yes.
core foundations of your craft before you move on to higher level functions. So I'd still say that. I'm not sure that those people are hiring. And the other thing I would caution is that, the role of the sales development rep used to be the perfect entry level role. And there's still people that are hiring SDRs, but I do think that role is challenged more than it has been in the past, because I think the rote automation of all of these technologies that are creating millions of emails and trillions of text messages is diminishing people's attention span and their ability to engage.
Yeah.
And so, but that said, yeah, should you take I would invest in your own education outside of a core company providing for it. That might be Pavilion, that might be like SV Academy, that might be Sales Assembly, but it's something where it gives you some exposure. I guess fundamentally what I would say is more than ever, your career is your responsibility, and
Good
that
advice.
nobody is really going to be looking out for you in the way that you might hope or expect.
Well, it's very good advice. You've got to take control of your own career now. And it's a different one. There's lots of opportunity, but I think that's sage advice for sure. Just out of respect for your time, Sam, we'll wrap things up here a little bit, guys. Dave, any final questions for Sam?
Yeah, it was actually Mark and I were chatting about one of the aspects of the book that we already touched on a little bit, with compensation. Wondering if you had any advice for, somebody's a founder, they're, kind of leading a business, and they're just bringing in kind of a sales function. Like, what kind of advice do you give to them on how they should craft, a sales compensation plan for a team that kind of aligns properly with what the organization's trying to do? And that's been something where I've been in that situation a few times, and I think it's hard to find the perfect model. Just curious on your thoughts on that.
I don't think there is a couple of thoughts. The first is that before you hire someone else to sell, you better have done it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That is that's a prerequisite. It's not, I have this great product,
Totally.
I need to go sell it. You have to have done it. I don't care what you think about your sales capabilities. If you can't sell it, they definitely can't sell it.
Yeah.
That founder and CEO on your business card or email signature, and they don't. So I think you should get between 5 to 20 clients on your own as a founder before you go out and look to invest in the sales function. The next thing I would say is, okay, you want to hire your first 1 or 2 salespeople. What should be their comp plan? Well, a quota implies predictability. And if you don't have predictability, then I don't think we should be talking about quotas. I think what you want to do is define a very generous commission structure to validate the second. First, you show that you can sell it. Then you need to show somebody other than you can sell it. Okay, well, you're not probably going to be able to pay that person very much in base salary. So maybe we just give them 20% of every sale, and maybe we give them a year. And if they make too much money and we feel annoyed that they made too much money, let's consider that a great success. That would have been way better that they made too much money than not enough. And then from there, once we have a little bit of predictability, then we can start to design some kind of, comp structure. At scale, 20% of bookings does not work at scale. At scale, there's a lot of companies that were paying 15%, 20%. The math of that in an interest rate environment that is normalized as opposed to where there's free money does not work. The number that tends to work better than others is 10%. Now, you need to be able to show that 10% plus base salary equals an amount of money that can pay that person's bills. But so the benchmarks, which many people know, but are roughly 10 times base, should be the quota, or 4 times OTE. So if you're an account executive and your OTE, your on target earnings is 150, and that's 75 base, 75 commission, then that's I guess 750 in annual. Your target, your quota should be 750, I think, but I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
So
actually, those are great metrics to take away. Those are very, very helpful.
Yeah, but the main thing I would say is too many people are like, we're building a revenue model to get to 2 million in ARR. I'm like, below 2 million ARR, the revenue model is interesting, but we should really be thinking about milestones the business needs to hit that work towards predictability as opposed to working backwards from the spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's great. Hey, team, we'd keep talking for hours. And by the way, the first thing I'd get into, Sam, would be your specific curriculum for the CRO school. I'd be very interested in that given what we do. Lots of great stuff to share there. But team, we've had a really good taste of kind folks finish first. And one of the things that I didn't get when I started in professional sales was a sense of self-esteem or pleasure for being in professional sales. When I started, it felt like a default because I wasn't, at that point in time, I hadn't done an MBA. My friends were in investment banking. There were lawyers. It felt like I took the easy route until I realized it was the best job ever. So this, I wish I had this book 20 years ago, 25 years ago. You've got it now. Kind folks finish first. The Considerate Path to Success in Business and Life. Sam Jacobs with Carrie Linsenbigler. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
You did? Yeah, you did.
Let's pick up that, folks. Sam, how do people learn more about you and Pavilion?
You can email me, sam@joinpavilion.com. You can follow me on LinkedIn, where some other people have chosen to do that. And you can go to joinpavilion.com. And we just upgraded the website. So at a minimum, it's much faster now.
Fantastic. Dave, how do people find you?
Yeah, I mean, right, as you mentioned, Mark, I'm in the podcast business right now, both on the podcast, hosting and technology, as well as advertising. The hosting company is called Libsyn, Libsyn, just libsyn.com. And then the advertising side is advertisecast.com. And anybody's interested can check that out.
Fantastic. Guys, first of all, thank you very much for joining today, taking time out of your really valuable time. I think there's been huge value to the audience today. And folks, I want to thank everybody who's listening to us on LinkedIn Live, who joined on the webinar, or who's listening to a podcast in future. We actually run this podcast to try and help improve the performance and professionalism of B2B sales team, and also improve the lives of professional salespeople. That's what we're trying to do here. And I definitely know there's things we can do to improve, and you're the ones who tell me that. We love constructive criticism. So if you like today's podcast, please do like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast. That really matters to us. But if there's things that we can do to elevate this podcast to make it more valuable to you, please let me know. My personal email is markcox@inthefunnel.com, markcox@inthefunnel.com. We love constructive criticism. Please be direct. And anybody who sends us a note, they get a nice note back from us. We'll respond to every piece of advice. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. And we'll see you next time on the Selling Well podcast. Sam, Dave, thank you so much for joining. We'll see both of you again soon, I hope.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much
Mark.
for having
Thanks,
me.
Sam.
Dave, great to meet you. Take
You
care.
too.